Hey, it's working. That was easy thinking.
Just gonna get this going. All right, and we're gonna go live here in a second, and I'll just do a little bit of an intro for the live feed.
What's up, guys?
What's up, buddy?
Hey.
How you doing?
Hey,
Are
Mark.
we live? Hey, Ari. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, we just went live, so I'm... Oh, and here comes Andreas. Perfect timing. Wow.
My buddy, oh, that's Romy. Andreas must be next. But I invited my buddy Roman from the Rising from the Ashes podcast. I hope you don't mind,
Dude,
Joe.
I was just talking to him earlier. How's it going, dude?
Hello.
Howdy.
We're trying to schedule him in for September.
We were just doing our first Alt Media United podcast for the Alt Media United cooperative that you are all a part of. So it's fucking badass that we're doing this right afterwards. But
why is your camera all weird, dude?
My camera?
You look all sideways or something.
Oh, yeah, that's just how I have it angled. I'm going to move I'm going to move you guys so you're over there, and then I'll be looking at you guys. Hold on.
Hello, Ari.
That's no big deal.
Howdy.
We're gonna be doing Ari's gonna do his thing, so I'm just gonna it's gonna be great for me. I'm gonna sit back and just watch his stuff because I've heard it, but I haven't got to see it yet.
Oh, there he is, Andreas.
How's it going, man? I can't hear.
Howdy.
Oh, there you go.
I don't see anyone new, but howdy. How's it going?
Now I can hear you. All right, there it is. Man, what a crazy. I had to find a place I could set up to do all this. So excuse me, and I'm also using a new device. But how
No
is
worries.
How's it going? So just quick introductions. We are live now. So hello to anybody who's in the chat, which nobody's in there yet. I'm Joe. This is my wife, Jen.
I'm Jen.
Ben's my brother over there. And then, of course, you got Ari, Andreas, Roman, and Mark. So I think we're all kind of familiar with each other.
I know we're recording, and this has nothing to do with Terracotta. I'm super excited. Can I show you something I got today?
Yeah.
These, oh man, can I? It's like a trick. There you go. On top of me, you can see it. So these are actually cells from the original Alvin and the Chipmunks production.
Green screen's fucking with
Green
us.
screen, yep.
Yeah, I don't think
It's not.
it's one of those things. It's too real to be seen.
Yeah, you're gonna have to disable the background for that to work.
No one gets
You're really
to see
cool.
It's terrible.
Congrats.
Zoom was like, "Oh, you're excited?" No.
Yeah.
It's
That's
exciting.
the big thing about certain kinds of, I feel like magic and technology, this is kind of this. I've been talking about the enchanted rock idea that like your tablet is an enchanted rock or a chip is an enchanted rock. And so this J.K. Rowling thing that's wrong, really, that magic and technology are different. They're really, it's magic and technology. Magic is technology. Technology is
Perspective.
But consciousness is like that big thing, right? So I feel like you can tell the technology that had bad intentions, it doesn't work right on purpose,
Wherever you just set your device, it's covering up the mic.
Oh yeah.
That's something.
Is it better?
Yeah, I bet if you put it landscape, you would be able to hear it and talk into it better.
Is this not landscape? This is landscape. It is.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. Is this
Thank you,
you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't tell it was landscape from your face, but I could tell that the mic got covered.
It does. Is it weirdly square, right? Yeah, the picture has become square. I don't know, man. I'm using my phone. I don't have proper Wi-Fi. I'm using data. I thought about walking around the park to talk, but I think this will work.
Walking around the park, talking about Torteria.
It happens a lot. I remember I was driving across America a couple of weeks ago, and I had to do one. I rented a hotel room in Wyoming, like a motel room. It was like something out of The Shining. That was with Sam Tripoli. And then like a couple of weeks earlier than that, around that time, I was in Chicago and I pulled over on the side of the highway and had to do one. And I was like, well, that's not, and sometimes those are the best ones because I'm less, I could put like a bunch of notes together, but I might miss something really interesting that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
that's true.
don't have to focus on the technology as much and actually just the conversation.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully there's no bad echo, but.
Oh, it's not bad. I can always do some post stuff too, but whatever. It's what it is. People listen still. It's crazy. Like
Go ahead and intro. I'll be right back. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so I'm Andreas. For anybody who's like been wondering about what this is going to be about. I talk about revised history, recent history, lost history, stolen history, erased history, and stolen history. Did I say that one already? Because that's a big one too. And so a lot of it's about things you've already heard about, but you might have realized that something in the historical narrative was a lie. And then it starts tearing apart other historical lies. And then you can find out what was really going on at that time. And then we look into the truth about that history. And so one of the things that really ties it all together is Tartaria, because it's a nation that's on every map, but it was just kind of forgotten about. So we've been doing a lot of accounting, where I interview people from Tartarstan and find out like what's going on in their lives. And we look at the historical context of Tartaria, 1,000 years ago, and go to different libraries. And so, I used to be an engineer. I worked for NASA. I did internships for a number of things, like Stanford, was working on an atomic force microscope. And, eventually I just decided that I didn't really like working for the people I was working for so much. I don't really hate or have like a reactionary thing against science or historical narrative. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, the other guys are trying to. I think there's a lot of problems with the historical narrative, and it comes from the system itself. It tries to be critical until you have proof, and so sometimes things get held back, and you can manufacture fake proof. So my main thing is not to be like, reactionarily against the narrative, but just to show that this is the new narrative. This is the future. This is the original true narrative, and it's not like a ancient aliens thing. It's like a recent Tartarians thing. It's a very real, practical thing. That's my whole thing.
And he's got a show called Recent Tartarians for those who don't know. Right on.
I was going to say we should probably do a little bit of plugs at the beginning, and then we can get into it. So that was Mark Steves. Everybody knows Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. How's it going, buddy?
Come on, brother. Thank you. And I got to say, shout out to Andreas. I love this guy. Shout out to the episode you did with Sam, dude, and Mark Twain talking about that whole segment. I've never heard any of that, so I was excited. But for folks who are interested in any of that,
great to see you.
Yeah, dude. And we're starting a new podcast called the Synchro Mystic Exploration of the Ever Expanding Now. We're 3 episodes in, but I hope to have Andreas on there. Ari, we're going to talk about synchronicity and get into how you can actually change your life for the better, and maybe how the research is a part of that, because I think the mystery that we're all unfolding here, getting into, is like what makes this so fun for me.
Right. Yeah. I'd also say check out Andreas.me if you haven't already figured it out. I have a website that's updated now, so you just go to www.andreas.me. That's it. Just Andreas.me.
Oh, it's not Xirtus.com anymore?
I do have that too. Xirtus or xirt.us. I have xert.us also. But Andreas.me is easy so that people can find, I feel like it's an easier name. You might have heard of it,
Yeah. Then we got Roman from Rising from the Ashes. How's it going, buddy?
Hello. How are everybody? How are everybody today?
You're gonna fit in just fine.
Is great.
It's a super meta question.
I are a baboon.
Yeah, give us your show or where we can find you too.
Oh yeah, Rising from the Ashes podcast. We've had Ari on before. That was an amazing episode, dude. So much love going around. Alternative history. I cover a lot of plant medicine because health is the most important thing. Health is wealth. It's the goodness that is with your cellular body. All that good stuff. And thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate everybody.
Of course, dude. And then last but not least, we got Ari Asulin, right? Did I say that right?
Absolutely.
It's not Asulin, everybody. It's Asulin.
I always get it wrong. I'm sorry, Ari.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. Either or. So,
he's the man with the presentation for us tonight. So we're gonna kind of just hand it over to him, and then you guys can duke it out because you guys know way more about Tartaria and everything than we do. So I'm just gonna hand it over to Ari here, and if you're just listening on audio, head over to Rockfin because this is gonna be visual heavy, I'm sure. So
yes,
Ari, take it away.
Try to. Absolutely. So my website is paradigmthreat.net, and I started it two years ago when I sort of hit a climax of research. Went from going from amateur and investigative to starting to decide that I'm ready to make conclusions on things. And I can see like everyone has sort of their angle on why they care about conspiracy, history, all history, all that. Everyone has their investments into it, right? Someone likes it because of family or where they're born, or something they just saw online. But in my case, I came from a social engineering sort of perspective, where I would say I'm sort of late to the game when it comes to conspiracy theory in general. And I've been catching up since about 2014 when I started getting interested in it. But the social engineering aspect of it is what really caught my interest. Going back to the early 2000s, of the online days, you got IRC, you got StarCraft on Battle.net, you got all these new technologies just coming right out without any with any gauges, and people sort of discovering how to communicate in all kinds of ways. And I sort of was drawn to social engineering, let's just say, the idea of BSing, pulling pranks on people, trying to play tricks online, especially in video games and forums. I came from a website called OC Remix, which we remixed video game music. And yeah, there was just a lot of pranks going around. And I just really got this dose of the idea that people can be so easily social engineered. They can be sort of routed into, mundane conclusions that, they're better than that, but they can do it, but they can be routed anyway. And the power of that is what drew me to conspiracy land. Certain topics that I saw, which I did not understand right off the bat. I saw an article in 2010 about predictive programming. And this concept was just like hard to, why would that work? What is it? That sounds stupid. That would never work. Those are all the initial conclusions when you read these concepts, until you finally get to the point where you want to say, okay, maybe it just does work, and maybe it works really well too. Maybe predictive programming is what they ended up, let's just start calling them the deep state, have decided is the best way to rule people. You don't tell them, you don't hide the plans from them, you don't lie to them all the time. You show them stuff to their face in a proper context. You tell them what you want them to believe, what you don't want them to believe. They've been doing that throughout television, movies, media, especially in education, and through government policy, especially foreign policy, which is usually based on some kind of mundane concept, some usually racist or scarcity concept. And so all of this programming essentially puts the onus on us, the individual, because we haven't organized any kind of resistance in the last 60 years. This world hasn't seen any kind of meaningful resistance movements that didn't just get defeated right away. So I'm covering a lot of topics here, but the point is that it's because of this predictive programming, it puts the onus on all of us to be the ones to disprove everything. Like, oh, that science fiction movie had something real in it. So if I try to tell somebody that, they're going to say, what, you think science fiction is real? It's all stacked against us. We can't say, look, trust me for a second that they're trying to fool us by telling us their plans in movies. People would be like, what? It works so well on the masses. It's
because it's so easily dismissible. We just talked about that the other day, about how it's easily dismissible. They're like, that was a movie, dude, you're insane.
Exactly.
Well, and it's entertainment. Entertainment has been the gateway for pretty much everything for almost a century.
Well, entertainment's a psychological,
absolutely.
It's a commercialized art that you can study the reactions of people so much. That's what they say for advertising whenever they spy on you. But it's so much deeper because it's about how you're going to respond to something. And it's true, like there's the initial response versus the latent response. So you can have a generation trained to hypnotically react to their parents believing in something that's irrationally installed. All of that is totally real.
It's very studied.
Some things about Tartaria are actually part of a psychological operation, which is interesting in itself. And we've seen 1968, I think, Freedom of Information Act, CIA mentions Tartaria. You can go back further than that, though. I mean, you can go back to the Morals and Dogma. Albert Pike and Freemasonry in the 1800s is talking about Tartaria. So there's already like a setup and a narrative for the word being used. And if you're hinting at it being used now by so many people that it could have a generalized meaning that leads towards the World Economic Forum's Davos reset, then I'm right with you.
Absolutely.
I definitely think people
one sec, let's get to that Tartaria in a second, because we'll get there in a sec. With the predictive programming aspect of it, which you just said, absolutely, they have all kinds of ways to prevent us from ever getting to the information. And then at that point, the onus is on us to prove it. The angle that I came into all of this with was in 2014 when I got hit hard by the whole Nibiru conspiracy, the idea that there could be, aliens involved in human affairs, federated government, you name it. I saw them all at once. And I didn't really know what to believe because all of them explained why things are so bad. No one else had an explanation, but these guys did. So I really got hooked on this idea that, yes, there actually could be someone in charge of Earth. I totally believe that we're in sort of a prison planet situation here. This is not natural at all, but we need to come up with.
That had to have been a really rough week for your brain.
These are scary things. And I think maybe some people might describe similarities. I went through physical and mental withdrawal. It was a big thing. I have strong ties to Israel. My entire family's over there. They all wanted me to move there in 2015.
Actually, if you were Israeli, how religious were you? Because I think the idea of Eden being a walled garden prison planet is pretty much supplied by the entire narrative, right?
Well, I'll get there. Religion in general has predictive programming concepts in it where you can certainly sort of ascertain anything that's going on to the will of God or the devil. And so it again puts down an onus on me to say to my family, these things aren't happening for the reasons you think. Anyway, so I was like just stretched, and I really just needed to have some kind of grips over this one. I couldn't accept any of the theories as put because none of the conclusions were hypotheses. Hypotheses are very important. They can explain the past. Hypotheses are supposed to predict the future. If you don't have a working hypothesis, you don't have anything. So, these people about Nibiru and time travel and everything like that did not have a working hypothesis that predicted anything, past or present or future. I needed something better. So, what I really got hooked on was this idea that there could be life not on Earth, but not so far out, just right there in the solar system, right there on Mars. It doesn't have to be any further than that. And they could have all this reason to sort of need to dominate Earth, resources, all kinds of stuff, and that they shared our history. Before I get into that too far, I actually saw a lot of reason. I got a lot of clues my whole life that this is the case. The first biggest clue is my favorite book, War of the Worlds. 1900 it came out, and it was the first science fiction, with the exception of that Cthulhu book, which isn't really a space movie fiction. It was first space science fiction book ever. War of the Worlds came out in 1900, and it said, this is fiction. We're not dealing with the truth anymore. Everything that we're going to tell you now is fake. Before that, you actually had 100 years of literature, at least, especially here in America, it's like places in Tucson, actually nearby where I live, that talked extensively of what they saw on Mars. We've all heard about canals and water and all this kind of stuff. And that no one ever said any of that was fiction or even had a category of science fiction back then. It wouldn't have been necessary. The true stories were more amazing than the ones you can make up. So something happened in the 20th century where we started labeling entire categories of stuff fiction. Tartaria, for example, falls directly into that. And suddenly we have a situation where we don't know what is true, what to believe in. Things are torn from other places, relocated, time periods are lied about, locations are lied about. So again, I need to have grips over this. I couldn't just accept, it's impossible, unsolvable. There has to be a primer. Just like with social engineering, there's usually a plan, a top-down plan that explains everything we're seeing right now. And with modern history, with my channel on Discord, a Paradigm Threat channel, I had a bunch of people come in early, and they started telling me all this stuff. Rome isn't true. That Rome never happened. It's a lie. And the timeline of 2,000 years, 2021 that we're in, is also a lie. Hadn't heard this one before. I was kind of blown away by the timeline, phantom timeline hypothesis, right? And unfortunately, I couldn't find any good references, but my mind was blown when I went to Wikipedia and I found just a tiny article in Fomenko, which listed all of his claims all at once. I never heard that stuff before about the Crusades and Trojan War.
Recently.
Right, yeah. This stuff was clearly hidden from us under the guise of Russia.
Though, there's been people for 100 years almost now, because Fomenko, what did he start in like the 30s? So it's like 90 years of research that some people knew about. It's like certain pockets of people that were isolated from each other.
Right. So, I come from a religious background, and I'm not religious, and I really am scrutinizing of religions. And I usually try to find, what they're fighting about. And I've always wondered what actually makes a difference between a Jew and a Muslim and a Christian when they're almost identical if you really look at it.
Ask Maimonides, right?
Say what? What was that?
Oh, ask Maimonides, right? Maimonides. Yeah.
Maimonides. I have to look that up. But
he's the philosopher who ran
okay.
Spain, who chose, like, he's a Jew who ran Spain for Muslims during the time of Christians.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Like, for example, what is the real origin story for the Jews and Muslims? Was it, ancient times? Or is there no connection between those ancient people and people today? Nothing that can be actually ascertained. And so I started looking at every one of these questions, not as anything that has ever been solved, but things that are still being fought over today, because it gives people power. People in Israel, people outside Israel, you name it. There's all kinds of power ascertained by causing conflict. When in the 90s, if you looked at the culture of the world in the 90s, we were intelligent, our media was coming out, just calling out all of this stuff. Long time ago, we were ready to change. And then 9/11 happened, and suddenly everyone was put back on the old track of thinking, Muslim versus Jew versus Christian. It's almost like, wasn't that just a trick to make us think on those terms again? So I had to really get into the grips of where these terms come from. And when I finally found Fomenko, it was like, okay, now I want to just accept everything he says. He's got to be the right guy, right? And so, then I find people who are critical of Fomenko.
He worked for the Stalinists. I mean, he couldn't have obviously said everything he believed.
Yeah, right. He was clearly a state-sponsored guy, started in the university, and they'll just allow anything in there or out of there. But, for all intents and purposes, he might not have realized that he was being watched or anything. He just seemed like a normal guy to me. His research was based on books that he saw in the Kremlin. None of that's doubtable. It's all very serious and real. Whether or not the Russians wanted this to happen, or if it was an artifact of the fall of the USSR, it was up for debate. But to me, the biggest question was, is this the reliable source now? Is this it? Can we now trust this guy? And what I found out is that the Russians also have, biases towards the West. They have their own kind of version of history, and they think that they're wronged in many places, where the Western people think they were wronged. So that was finally the primer I was looking for. Not that one was right or the other one was right, but that there's this huge schism in Europe. It's East versus West. It's polytheistic East versus monotheistic West. It's Inquisition, Roman Empire, which is actually the Russo Empire, coming from the East to the West and causing the Inquisition, making a bunch of people flee to America. That whole story is real. It's just that the people of the story have been fighting each other and are still fighting today over it. Why wouldn't you? If you benefited from a crime, you need to cover up the crime. So I finally found my primer. All history has been redacted, because, in my opinion, because people need to cover up their crimes. That's the biggest reason of all. Everything else is secondary. The biggest crimes of modern history, for example, that happened in the 19th century, might have been pushed back as far as 1,000 years or more. The Aztec Empire being wiped out by the conquistadors. That might have happened in the 19th century, and pushed back. Fomenko certainly believes that Columbus came 300 years after they said he did. And there was an attempt to wipe out the American population. But we also have records that failed, that the Spanish Empire, their vassal to the Russo Empire, did not get very far in America, that they were sort of ordering, well, this was the Jesuits just at the time, were ordering the Native Americans to sort of give up their tribes. Native Americans refused. And they gave them this edict that says, if you don't obey us, the church said to the Native Americans, if you don't obey us, we're going to take your children, we're going to enslave them, we're going to subject you to the yoke of the church, is what they said. So this, again, this is the kind of thing I'm looking for. Unsolved conflicts that are still happening today. The East versus West thing is very prevalent. You got monotheistic Reformation style religions spread throughout the world, thanks to the Jesuits. And in Russia, you have this evidence that actually all of that religion was theirs, that it came from there. The Jerusalem number 2 was actually the Kremlin. That's where Jerusalem was before the 19th century. The Kaaba, the original Mecca, was right next to the Kremlin, this big cube that everyone worshiped because it looked like the North Pole of Saturn. And Christianity had its origin from the Orthodox Church, and Islam, they were the original Jews of the Russo Empire. And that only because somebody defeated this empire and stole its history that we think anything else. We think Muslims came from Saudi Arabia and so forth. So I'm jumping all over the place. Anyone have any questions or anything so far?
I don't
Keep
think so, dude.
jumping.
You're
I like
taking
it.
away.
Killing
Yeah.
it, sir. Killing it, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Continue
Yeah, like I
what
said, this
you're
helps me get over each time. So for my hypothesis, I basically I was triggered completely by finding the mud flood conspiracy only about 9 or 10 months ago. I was blown away by it. This is not your normal conspiracy, not your daddy's conspiracy. This is not JFK. This is something else. This is something happened to the whole planet, and nobody wants to talk about it. It's about summing it up right there. And when I say nobody wants to talk about it, what I really mean is you go to these locations which qualify as mud flood locations, and we're looking for reasons why this happened, alternate to our hypothesis that we come up with. And nobody in these locations will ever talk about these things, these events. They'll say these buildings were always like that, or that's just the basement. So that's what I mean when I say nobody wants to talk about the mud flood geographically. So the mud flood seems to be, let's just say, the biggest conspiracy of all. That's the one that we have to find an explanation for it. I actually had a person come on the channel today and say, how do you know it's not liquefaction? Yeah, that's a great question, great hypothesis. Liquefaction, it's known to be caused by earthquakes or energy weapons. It can make a car sink into the ground. It can make a house sink into the ground. But if you look at those videos, you'll see that the cars, the house, they always tilt when they affect liquefaction, that they're never straight. It's like the Tower of Pisa. And in fact, these mud flood buildings never do that. They actually go straight into the ground, or the ground level goes straight up above them. Some locations, right? Yeah, some locations, 5, 6 feet. Some locations, 20, 30 feet stories. Some locations way higher than that. Salt Lake City Temple, for example, apparently has 5 stories buried underneath it. And no one would have wanted to build it that way, and those stories have windows. What was that good?
Well, I've heard 7, but
7,
exactly.
yeah. I was being
And
conservative there,
and anywhere that's in the Mormon area, the Deseret buildings, supposedly as tall as any of the buildings are, they're at least that deep, right?
Thank you for telling me that. Yeah, confirmation. Like, that's something weird. And you got Mormons who represent a modern religion. They already have an explanation for all this, right? They said that the Nephites, known as Nephilim in the Christian Bible, came from Tower of Babel to North America. When they mean the Tower of Babel, they actually mean the collinear configuration of Saturn, not an actual tower. But that's theory. What was known is the Book of Mormon says that they're all killed off, and that they were giants. They're a giant race here in America that were all killed off because God willed it so. So the first question to ask is, are Mormons talking about the mud flood? Their book says way further back, but it fits perfectly. This idea that God showed up, killed off all of the big things, all the giants, anything else that sort of couldn't withstand lightning strikes, were sort of exposed out in the open, and didn't have certain kind of cathedrals built that could withstand the sort of electric onslaught that was involved with the mud flood event. So jumping around, but let's just get to the beginning of the theory here. I'll actually share screen so you can actually see my little. That's not it. There it is. Right up here. And yeah, I haven't even done this video yet, but that's because I got to the middle and I realized that I have some other deductive logic that I need to sort of start over my theory with. I'll explain to that in a second. So the mud flood directed energy weapon hypothesis. The idea here is that the mud flood event, assuming it was a single event worldwide, must have been caused by some sort of energy release. Yeah, you need energy to move things, to move mud, if it's a shovel or if it's electricity, and that energy has to be sourced by something. Without finding the energy, we don't have an explanation for the mud flood period. So that's why it's a directed energy weapon hypothesis, because the idea is that regardless of how the energy got there, it was directed into certain locations on purpose, as opposed to, say, a natural phenomenon like the Earth experiences some kind of, solar cooking or something every 200 years or something. We don't have any reference points for that. We have stuff like the Tunguska event, which is crazy, and we don't know where it came from. And so we have actually a lot of reference points. Something crazy happened in the 19th century, a dust bowl and so forth, explained by human.
Not to interrupt, but someone remind me later and tell my theory on that one after.
But yeah, let's cover dust bowl at the end. So I'll go into a bunch of them. So the point is, if there was such an event, if we can determine when it happened, then we absolutely have to determine why it happened. it seems like most of the researchers I've seen have agreed that this event occurred between the early 19th century and 1860. So about a 60-year period where it started, stopped, reoccurred, and then after the 60s, it never happened again and was forgotten about, whatever this event was. So first question is, well, let's get to the question. We got to what and how is well, I'm out of order here. Next question really should be, no, okay, so how is fine. Okay, so if we know when it happened and we don't think it was a natural event because we don't have natural reference point, then we have to explain why it happened geopolitically. We have to look at that aspect of it. Even if it's a federation of aliens that invaded Earth, if it's that, then we have to look at that as the hypothesis. So the first thing about the mud flood is it seems excessive. It seems like this world became post-apocalyptic at that time, and that we're sort of living in a recovering world. It's going back to normal very slowly. That this event was not what anyone wanted to happen, not even the people that caused it. That would be the first, I would say, logical guess to make. Otherwise, you could say, they would have done it in such a way that kept them in power and kept the secret going, and they could use it again in the future. But again, this seems to be an excessive situation where buildings rose, and there's no reason for them to want that. They might have wanted to destroy targets, but they didn't want to leave evidence behind. So, so what is the way that this event could have happened in the 19th century? Well, we all know about theories of technology in the last 1,000 years. A lot of theories coming out. You got sound cannons, you got airships, all kinds of cool stuff that may have existed and is now suppressed. So that would give us an idea of where we were with technology at the time. Is that enough to destroy the surface of the Earth? No. So what are we looking for? We're looking for some kind of advanced weapon, something really advanced for its time. If humans on Mars shared a shared history with us on Earth, that is only about what I've estimated to be about 4,000 years long, then they would just be only a matter of hundreds of years ahead of us in technology. They would have the capability of making this kind of weapon very easily. It's just about coalescing energy to one point and releasing it. The energy has nowhere else to go but the nearest planet in opposition. So when Earth and Mars become in opposition, it happens every 36 months, I believe. This is a possibility for this energy to be released from one planet to the next. The energy, of course, would come out in a haphazard sort of way, but coalesce to a point on the Earth's EM field, pierce it, and come down onto the ground. This instrument, you could call it, was precise. It was so precise. It could actually carve out locations on the ground, destroy a region. It was a weapon. That's what the hypothesis is. Now, where was the target? If we look at geopolitical events, we could see that there was a French Revolution right before, and that leading up to the War of 1812. The War of 1812 was another big overlooked event of the 19th century that we've all heard about in school, but nobody talks about it. They always talk about Waterloo. They always say Napoleon, screwed up in Waterloo. It's like, well, Waterloo is nothing. The invasion of Russia was 420,000 soldiers. It was huge. They crossed the Alps. It was nothing. So then what was it? What was Napoleon's invasion of Russia? Was that, like a big deal war? Was it like World War I kind of? Because they don't call it a world war. Well, surprise, surprise, there's another war happening at the exact same time here in America, War of 1812, against the British. And if you look closely, the British at the time were just independent from they were vassal to the Roose Horde Empire, and they had just become independent. And the American colonies, again, had declared independence, 1776, from the Roose Horde Empire, not from Britain. When the British attacked Americans in 1812, Napoleon was here. He had all of Louisiana. And he had about a third of North America. This battle happened while Napoleon was here, and it happened while he was invading Russia. It happened in the same year. This is a World War of 1812. And of course, it needs to be taught that way in school. It's the first World War we had. It's very different from World War I, of course, because one was fought with meager artilleries and mustard gas and trenches. It was almost pathetic, and none of the soldiers wanted to fight. But the 1812 war, go ahead.
It's pretty bad, though. They have all in 1812, and we've been calling it World War Zero. It's like it has unbelievable amounts of high industry, like the kinds of explosives and biological warfare and fire and other things that seem anomalous. They had a lot of tech.
Yeah, I should totally play 1812 Overture right now because it kind of makes the point. I mean, Tchaikovsky hated that song. He didn't want to work on it. You can kind of listen to it closely and see why. You know, it's represents the Tsar's victory over Napoleon. Nobody wanted the Tsar to win. Nobody wanted Napoleon to lose. But anyway.
But they literally, that uses cannonballs, right?
Yeah, right there. It uses cannonballs in the song.
Literal cannonballs in the.
But were any real cannonballs used in the Battle of 1812?
Right.
Some people say that the cannons, right? Yeah. Some people say the cannons don't work. You put gunpowder and cannonballs in the cannons, you ignite them, they just crack in half. So they could potentially have been sound weapons. You know, could defer to the other experts on that one, but I've seen those videos and it's pretty convincing. So the 1812 war seemed to be a time of high technology. And then right after that, we have the mud flood event. And now we have this sort of reset, which people aren't aware of what technology is possible. A lot of it's, we're told, is not possible. Lasers, anti-gravity, instantaneous teleportation, healing technology. We're taught that things like the stuff they put in the water, fluoride, is good for your teeth. When there's every reason to believe in the 18th and 19th centuries that people were very telepathic back then, and telepathy may have played a role in some of these major events. You had the 1666 revolution of Judaism, where the rabbi was telling everyone that he'd been hearing voices directly for many months. And a lot of witnesses confirmed it, and it has literature. That could have been really telepathy. Was it from Angel, or was it from somebody on Mars during opposition? Let me throw out one random factoid out there, just something that just really, just nails these things into my head. But I found this one website which listed trade points from the Dow Jones in the 20s and the 30s, and they were listing the trade points and comparing them to the Mars opposition, the periodic 36-month Mars opposition. Unbelievable, right? There's no way there's going to be a correlation, and there was. Apparently, the stock market went nuts every time Mars was in opposition for periods of 40 or 50 years straight. This is unmistakable evidence that they are involved in our affairs, even to the point of they're buying our real estate right here. So, as humans, this is not anything else. It's not like War of the Worlds where they make it gruesome on purpose. In fact, War of the Worlds stole their creature from Cthulhu anyway. A lot of people say that in the forums. Looks identical. And it's a mind control, thing trying to control humanity. It's the same thing again. So anyway, War of 1812 appears to be the trigger for the mud flood, which is where I get my main reasoning that the mud flood is a response to Napoleon's victory of 1812. Now, officially, he lost that war. Take a look at the details of his invasion of Russia. You can see that he lost 420,000 soldiers just by having not enough resources. What's the word? Food supplies and stuff like that, and that they weren't ready for the winter. But again, these are professional soldiers from Europe. They were not unaccustomed to these kinds of environments. They had resources, they knew where to get them, and they knew how to hunt. The official story of Napoleon's loss 1812 makes no sense. He didn't seem to have lost that war at all. He seemed to have reached the Kremlin. The Tsar's army wasn't there, it was gone. And it looked like that's it, that's victory. And then suddenly he loses after that. So what else do we know? The Kremlin was burned to the ground. Apparently the Tsar was the one that did it. This region had a lot of cataclysm in it during that time. Later on in history, we see other cataclysms in the same region, like the Tunguska event. We got a lot of reference points that Siberia in general has gone through massive upheaval. Siberia, as we know now, is basically the covering up of this Tatarian empire, this Rus horde empire that used to exist for a long time. And when Napoleon, who was enemies with the Rus horde empire, when he defeated that empire, his victory had to be reversed, but they couldn't leave that empire in charge either. They were defeated too, and anyone else on Earth that might have later posed a threat. This is just going back to my theory of why it happened. If someone on Mars convinced everyone that they had to reverse the course of events of the Napoleonic Wars in order to reassert control over Earth, in order to continue the resources flowing, then then they would have all understood that this has to be done one time, has to be done correctly, cannot be done, kind of have to repeat this 200 years later. So you got to take out everyone that will eventually be a threat. Napoleon, obviously. The Tsar, well, they were actually the original empire enemies of the deep state. They were the ones where Jesus came from the Rus Horde Empire. His name was Christ Andronicus back then. And he went to Central Europe, Turkey at the time. He went to Istanbul, to Jerusalem 1, and sort of just caused all the problems and, screwed up their religion, told them they don't have to believe in any of that monotheistic, usury stuff, and they could just go straight to the Rus Horde's version of it. The Horde Empire was, in my opinion, and Fomenko's opinion, of course, he's biased, was a really well done empire. It was, of the people. It was first to bring democracy into the world. It's a lot of the stories were stolen by the memory of the Roman Empire. And then a lot of bad stuff was added in. Crucifixion, for example, which was extremely rare back then. It did not happen all the time, like they tell us in high school. It was extremely rare. And that they even crucified Andronicus probably has a lot more to do with the fact that he was a revolutionary. In the Bible, there's another revolutionary in the same trial called Barabbas. Barabbas might have been the original name of, or their name for him. Why? Because he's a barbarian. He's from the Rus Horde Empire. Horde, again, barbarian. They're implying that these people are not civilized because they don't follow their usury and monotheistic religions, essentially. They have barbarians in Africa. They have Tartarians in the East. They have names, bad names for everyone. So they call themselves, I'm actually not even sure what they call themselves, but Fomenko said Rus Horde Empire. And since he's Russian, I'm just going to go with that. So back to the mud flood. I was looking for, let's see, let's pull up some video here. I was looking for some real evidence of this. I got some theories now. And what we're looking for is lightning scarring across the earth on Google Maps. It's not hard to find stuff that looks like lightning scarring. This is dendritic effects. Dendritic effects. These are kind of spiky patterns where energy spreads out and finds as much room as it can. Rivers obviously cause dendritic effects, but so does lightning. Lightning constantly tries to find the highest ground, and in a concentrated point of lightning, it would deteriorate the highest point and cause a canyon, the amount of discharge you put into it. This, you can check out the Sapphire Project for the verification of this. They've done experiments in the lab of exactly this. Got negative electric scarring, which carves canyons, and positive electric scarring, which creates mountains, which is as amazing as that sounds. So first thing I did, I looked around for, scarring. And I started to come up with inductive hypothesis that actually a lot of the stuff we see can be explained by electric scarring. But that was not going to convince anyone who also can say that could have been rivers. So what I started finding later was locations that could not possibly be explained by anything. And that, whether or not they could be considered electric scarring. So let me pull up a couple here. We got, this one's really interesting, shiprock, negative lightning scarring. Well, that's what I call it. Nope, that's not, it's right here, there it is. Okay, so south of me in Arizona, it's this shiprock formation. And Andrew Hall of the Electric Universe Persuasion describes this as an electrically created structure, not just because of its weird shape and location, but also because of these weird long stretching arms that come out, again, in a dendritic fashion, which means, sorry, Google Maps trying to get out. That's great. Got stuck. There we go. Coming out in a dendritic fashion. So if these things can be explained by lightning scarring, they might be evidence of cataclysmic creation of mountains rather than the long-term version that they teach us in the school, uniformitarianism, billions of years, that kind of thing. This structure cannot be created in billions of years. It's up in the air. This region would have had to have been completely carved out evenly over this time. And instead we see these mesas all over the place. These mesas are flat, they're not unevenly carved at all. And there's no signs of rivers. So you see my point. Some of these structures could actually be, they're unexplained still. But here's the biggest mystery of shiprock, and you can look this up. The Native Americans have a mythology about this location saying it was created by star people. As their definition. They call them star people, from the stars. They don't know if they came from close by a planet like Mars or somewhere further, but they are star people to them, and they created this mountain. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's testimony that something like that may have happened on Earth. A bigger one, though, since that one takes some understanding of rock formation, the biggest one I found so far is the Grand Canyon crisscross. And I only found this about 4 months ago.
I was going to ask if a Grand Canyon was one of these potential areas of.
Totally. The biggest clue that there's something weird about the Grand Canyon, sorry, I zoomed out a lot here, is that it follows the Colorado River, which did not exist 200 years ago, 300, 400 years ago. In any of those maps, you check them out, you'll see it was the Rio Grande. That was the big river at the time, came right through this region, and it is sourced from all the northern water aquifers into a giant river all the way to Gulf of Mexico. Now we have Colorado River, which sort of snakes back up north. It goes into the Grand Canyon and allegedly carved it billions of years ago, or sorry, 1 million years ago, I'll be accurate. It's about like 5 million years ago, that's what they say. So here's the first problem. The Grand Canyon or the Colorado River did not carve out any other Grand Canyons. Like in Grand Junction, you see just normal sized rivers. There's no Grand Canyons. We see crazy other dendritic effects. We don't know what that is yet, but the point is, it all just starts right here in the Grand Canyon region and just carves this magnificent 1 mile deep scar. Could that have possibly been caused by a river? I say no. If it was 5 million years, then it would have caused another canyon at the beginning of the Colorado River and at the end of it.
It almost looks like veins or like a vascular system.
Yeah, there's a lot to say here.
I was just gonna say, isn't dendritic like derivative from dendrite, which is like the synapses in your brain?
Dendril. Let me pull up a picture real fast that really explains.
It's like a bot. It just describes any like branching.
Right, branching.
Plants,
I should say branching.
rivers.
Dia is like bio, so
Yeah.
it's like by way
Yeah.
through connection.
Yeah, here's
But I mean,
Fractal.
yeah, fractal too.
if you've noticed, it's a place where there's a lot of silicon, and so that's why a lot of people have talked about silicon trees or mycelial mushroom towers that grew before trees that would have excreted kinds of mineral supposedly like California, Silicon Valley has this, and so does Israel, and that's one of the reasons why like this idea of Isis, Ra, Elohim, is so important in that area. If you start looking for some of those, I guess you could call them electrocution points. You can see smaller examples of them in towns where they've been hit by lightning.
Yeah.
So have you seen the work of Mike Ferreira?
Maybe, not familiar.
So he started out like not knowing much about Tartaria either, or about Dews, but started looking at direct energy weapons and some of this stuff. He's a lot of good information on this whole area.
Yeah, look it up. I'll definitely check it out. So yeah, real fast, this picture right here, this is from the Electric Universe. You can check out, subscribe to their YouTube. They have amazing videos, and they already made the case. What we're seeing in a lot of these mountain formations are actually fractal or dendritic patterns. Here's a fractal pattern where, we thought that these kinds of mountains were carved naturally by, wind and rain erosion, but clearly there is a pattern in there. So going back to the Grand Canyon, dendritic patterns, yes, but is there anything that just proves it? That couldn't be something else. It couldn't also be rivers acting in a weird fashion. And that's when I finally found my crisscross. So let me pose the question to you. If two rivers form in any circumstances in nature, can they ever crisscross? Or is it more natural for rivers to follow the bed that already exists? Second river shows up on an existing river bed and it just flows into it. It doesn't crisscross and form a new river. If it's impossible, go ahead.
It can follow paths of least resistance. So if it's coming up to a point where certain kinds of crystalline mineral deposits or metallic glasses are starting to form, especially where a volcano is, long story short, that's the only place where that can happen.
Pretty much, right. So existing scar, right? So you're essentially saying something else would have had to already exist in that region that was so prominent that an existing river flowed through it. But here's the thing, as all that mineral that you just described exists within the slit of the region in this hypothesis, the river would have driven those minerals out sooner because they're so susceptible to erosion. And it would have still followed the existing riverbed pattern. It wouldn't have gone off in the direction that we see today. It would have been affected by that other crisscross in some way. Do you guys agree with that?
Sounds legit.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but in normal circumstances, I can see how it happens a lot. But nature's pretty weird because
Yeah.
what it's doing is it's following the path of least resistance. So sometimes water will go uphill to go
Right.
downhill further faster, and sometimes water will start a path because of some other, like you said, pre-existing reason, but that reason might be so small that it's a feedback loop, and the feedback loop builds so much that you can, like, have you seen like the Volnish Lake, right, in Russia, and they like diverted like less than 10% of the lake 40 years ago, but now the lake is completely dry because it no longer rains there, so every year it dried up more until it was gone.
Totally.
We can very quickly have a feedback loop system as well.
Right. In this condition, I just assume that after 5 million years, all things are equal, right? That any weird conditions would have evened
Well,
out.
I didn't want to interrupt, but another contention. So with this idea of millions of years being, carbon dated, let's say, or we're using carbon emissions to like
Right.
track. So the problem with that is what you can, what I would say is, I know people who would very reliably carbon date eruptions, but I don't know a lot of people who would confidently stand behind carbon dating years so specifically, especially when it's something so trivial as 1 or 5 million, because it's so different at that point.
Oh, I agree.
Because the amount of eruptions that could happen, we're predicting based on how many eruptions are happening now, which are already, by the way, a lot, but there could be moments where there were none. And I mean, theoretically, it's likely that there are always eruptions, but that also changes. It could be thousands of years ago, we just had so many eruptions. It seems like the carbon was, that's the other thing.
Totally agree. And I doubt many people here actually believe in this 5 million year timeline anyway, right? Raise your hand if you do. Yeah, I didn't think so. But yeah, I was only using that as a reference point to the existing hypothesis that this was carved by water. That's okay. And 5 million years or billion would have been long enough to sort of even out all of the weird effects of water and air and everything. And therefore, that explanation would still need something new to explain these crisscrosses that we're seeing. These, of course, aren't the only region. I could also go to.
Actually, I'd like to further agree with you by saying that over that many millions of years, this should have dissipated. If this was, it would have smoothed out.
Absolutely. Let's just looking through my list here.
So potentially it happens, in the mud flood paradigm theory.
Absolutely, that's
world.
my personal belief, but I'll hold back.
Right. So yeah, I'll get past this. Oh yeah, there is one other thing that I want to show. In Asia. Oh yeah, Great Wall of China, of course. So Great Wall of China, we've all heard, is this structure that the Chinese built in ancient times to hoard off the Mongol Empire. That's not zoom out. Okay, zoom out here. There we go. And as you can see, the shape here I got marked off of the wall, the Great Wall of China, built in different periods for different reasons. Right away, I'm sure you can point out a lot of contradictions. Like, wait a second. The first question is, why did they build walls around regions that essentially didn't really have much life in them? Another question is, why did they build them south of this desert region that nobody can live in? It's very unlikely that an army would go through. I can go on all day. Why isn't there a wall here that can just walk around? So there's problems with the Great Wall of China. I was looking close at it, and I noticed right away that it follows the same dendritic patterns as everything else. It's random. It's spaced out based on availability of space, energy, and that if there was a ancient wall built on these regions, that they probably didn't pick the best path because they sort of just built it everywhere. Furthermore, if you look closely at these regions, not much of them have much evidence of a Great Wall. They sometimes have walls, sometimes they have ridges, which could have been formed naturally. And then finally, I'm just going to cap it off by saying the Terracotta Warriors and a lot of other ancient artifacts of China are believed to be fake by a lot of people for a lot of reasons. That the Chinese history essentially itself is fake. Fomenko, again, will agree. He says that the Mongols are actually the Rus Horde Empire again, that the history is stolen, they're moved into the desert region. And they said they kept invading China, but actually, Fomenko points out that China was a vassal state of the Rus Horde World Empire, that the world was one big empire back then. they were not constantly fighting each other for thousands of years. There were no Mongols. So the Great Wall of China, to me, does appear to be an attempt to cover up a recent scarring that occurred in this region. Here's another way more prominent recent scarring that may have occurred in this region. India, the Himalayan mountains. Of course, a lot of people would just spit the drink out at this point to suggest that such a region could have been created recently or by cataclysm, that these aren't naturally forming mountains. But again, we see the dendritic patterns. These rock formations could not have been formed by water because they didn't start from one flat space and then carve out into water. They would have been much more, it would have been much more even like. These patterns here, they represent, well, if you go to the Electric Universe people, they will explain this a lot better, but they represent a spacing out of energy. In this region, you see that, let me map it up here. You see that the Himalayan sort of presses down against all of India right here. To explain this, they say, oh, this is a subduction zone. This is a continent sliding into Asia, causing Himalayan mountains to go up. Okay, that's a pretty good theory, but if you look at the world map of zones, let's see, got everything ready here. You'll see that this region isn't well explained by a, let me grab it. There we go. I have a better one. Oh yeah, this is it. This region isn't well explained by a plate. If you notice, the Asian plate, or the Indian plate, sorry, has to curve up and sort of bend into Asia in order to explain the Himalayan mountains. That subduction itself really isn't a good fit for this. They said that because they didn't have anything better. And if you remove subduction from the equation, then the Himalayas become extremely mysterious. Not just because they look mysterious, but because if you look at old maps, now here's the part that's going to be interesting. If I have it ready at all. No, I don't. Just bear with me 1 second. I can post all this out if
Have you
later.
Ari, quick question if you
go
don't
ahead.
mind me asking.
No, not at all.
There's myths of electric scarring on like the surface of Mars. Does anyone know about that or conclude that?
Absolutely, I can get into that.
Did you see that picture that NASA posted on Twitter earlier today that had camels and people walking in the background?
No, it's a totally different folder. Sorry, I got it now. Okay.
That was today?
Yeah, I'm going to find it and I'm going to send it to you. What's that?
All right, so I look at old maps. I love looking at old maps. Go to raremaps.com. Just, they have everything on display. Maps are a perfect place to just point out contradictions in history. They don't agree with each other. The regions are different times. Fomenko will just go out and say things like the French, English, and German maps of 16th, 17th century. The Jesuit expansion randomly placed Jerusalem in the Middle East when everyone knew Jerusalem was in the Kremlin. So maps actually represent a point of contention to fight over. Maps themselves represent the war itself. If you believe in one map, you're on one side. If you believe in another, you're on the other side. So in the case of India, the old maps of India look totally different from anything today. First thing you notice is the lack of the Himalayas. They're just not there. You see some mountains, but they're not, in the shape of the Himalayas. Let me go back to that picture. See, boom. And isn't it interesting how like Nepal and Bhutan are created on the Himalayan regions? Like they're the cover-up countries, of all of India. That so these countries didn't exist before. What did exist is these rivers. You can see this big delta right here. This is clearly the outlet of the aquifers of South Asia, with the mountain region being up here. So going back to that photo, let's take a look at the Ganges, because the Ganges doesn't go up there at all. That was a blurred photo. Okay. The Ganges starts down here in this delta, and it goes and curves around. It goes up here. There is the old delta right here. It's all dried up. Here is the old river. It's also dried up. So again, it's just like the Rio Grande versus the Colorado River. We have a new river. Everyone's heard of the Ganges. And we have this old river, which is dried up, is gone, and yet it appears in old world maps. So that is actually my bigger clue that this region did not used to have Himalayan mountains. It's completely electric scar that happened recently, 19th century. What do you guys say?
Have you seen California was an island?
Yeah, I can go into that.
All right.
There's, Cortez said it was an island, right? And the north side of it wasn't connected.
Everybody said it was an island. The
Right,
whole, like,
not
every
peninsula.
map of it is an island. But at some point, the gold rush, you've got people with these giant hoses and they're spraying dynamite, and like they blow up the mountain and then they wash it away in these giant flumes, and then they just completely buried. Again, not all of it, but enough of it that feedback loops completely dried up what is now basically Burning Man, Black Rock City.
Right.
Wow.
It could talk about the Nile. The Nile is a mystery.
But look right there, that's California. Look at that. That is a picture of California. It's an island.
You notice all the port cities? Port. These are parts of the Restored Empire. They go straight to Europe, no problem.
Batman is Zorro. Like, he's from Valencia, hence the bat symbol. And if you look into Capitola in Santa Cruz, that was originally where the capital was supposed to be before they wanted to move it to Sacramento, because it became the train depot. Wow. And they used that train to just keep lugging material.
Nice. So yeah, good. Thanks for mentioning California, because it ties into my point. Where is the Grand Canyon on these old maps? Can't zoom in here, but on the Real Maps website, you can zoom in as much as you want, go into detail, and you can see that there was old cities and old palaces in America with Roman architecture, and there was no Grand Canyon, and there was this huge sea in between here in California. It was clearly a different place. If you look at the northwest of North America, in all of these old maps, you'll notice it's big and empty. There's nothing up there. It's right here. You see all this detail, and right there, nothing. That was the mystery zone. That was the furthest place away from the European Reformation, Jesuit, Holy Roman Catholic Church Empire that had yet to be conquered by them, yet to be Christianized. And so it does not appear in any of these maps with any detail. They don't want to put any detail down because they plan to conquer them someday. Now that poses an interesting question. If these maps are sometimes the truth and sometimes plans for the future, then wouldn't they depict plans that could not have happened because they were screwed up by the mud flood events? And in fact, I believe that is what we're looking at here. We're seeing the original plans of the deep state. They got that Jesuit invasion going perfectly, and they were going to take over this land. They had the edicts for the North American natives, which were giants, and it was just a matter of time. They were evangelizing everyone. What could possibly have ended their plan? Nothing in the world except for one thing. This is called what I call the anomaly. It's described very well in the Matrix movies. The anomaly, the thing that turns the plan against itself, no matter what the plan was or how articulate it was. And that anomaly is Napoleon. Napoleon was raised on by a deep state. He was in their garden. He was married off to one of their people, and unfortunately, all of his plans got ruined early because of that French Revolution. And he was just standing around there the whole time. He was like, I'm trying to keep the peace, He's a general. And at the end of the revolution, he basically said, that's it. You guys have had your chance. We've tried everything with the aristocracy, with the Holy Roman Catholic Church, and they are devious. They're working against us. They're genocidal even. So we are not doing that anymore. Declared himself emperor. Napoleon turned this crazy Jesuit world domination plan on itself in such a short period of time that it led directly to the War of 1812. Tsar Nicholas III, declared himself emperor also of Eurasia at the time, because he was trying to undercut what Napoleon was about to do. Napoleon had no choice. It was going to be a battle between two emperors. And in my reckoning, it does seem like Napoleon had the upper hand, not technology. Never mind the technology. This is all about that Jesuit invasion. They were convincing every indigenous race on earth to give over their religion to Christianity, to monotheism. And they were so good at what they did. They were all they had to do was turn that plan to something better. The new plan that Napoleon had offered everyone was no more deep state, no more usury. You can go back to being a vassal state, like it used to be. And with this promise, he was able to convert each of these regions, especially Spain, especially Egypt, over onto his side. He got a lot of allies in a very short time. And it's because of these allies that I believe that the mud flood event, the weapon event, had to target all of his allies, anyone that could have potentially sided with him, and preserved the people who maintained loyal to the deep state, even in sight of his enormous popularity. Who are these people? Well, we know they're people who believe in the invisible God who rules things on earth. If you have that religion, if you are Christian, Jew, so forth, Buddhist, you will defer in times like this to the church and what they're saying, and they will say that Napoleon is evil. In fact, that's what the Tsar was saying of Russia. Do not talk to Napoleon. Do not let his men into your village. See no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. That's where all that came from. And because of that loyalty, these people were rewarded in this event. They were saved. They were spared. They huddled in their cathedrals. Cathedrals, of course, were things that nobody thought would be useful anymore, but they had a special purpose. They're cathodes. They can absorb an enormous amount of energy from the sky without causing destruction. And they are in true sanctuaries. So anyone rewarded with this old deep state Egyptian empire religion was saved in this battle of 1812, was preserved. And ever since that day, you have all these reference points to people saying so. You have the overture, of course, 1812 overture. What is the victory of Napoleon? Oh, it's God's victory of Napoleon, isn't it? God save the Tsar is what they say in the song. We've heard this everywhere else. We hear God save the Queen, God save the King or the Tsar, alternately in almost every European country, actually, not just one or two, but all of them. They all do the same thing at Western Europe, sorry. And they're all saying this same event happened, that God saved the Tsar. Which Tsar? Nicholas III of Russia, the one that declared himself Tsar. Now, what does Nicholas have to say about it? Well, in his testimony, which I read, he strictly told people, do not believe. This is divine intervention. Do not believe that that's what it is. He was telling people that this was not God. And you can look up those quotes. It was amazing. He had to mass produce text in order to prevent the religious people from sort of revolutionizing the vacuum within the remnants of the Rus' Empire. They were going to do it on a religious basis, and they did. The Bolshevik Revolution, which came only 80, 90 years later, was entirely a religious revolution. It was all about the majority. We're right. We're God ordained. We're going to take out everyone else and so forth. And it actually spawned all of the religious turmoil that we know today. But I'll get to that in a second. The evidence is all over the place. Everyone thinks that God saved the czars of the world, put them back in charge, and killed off the enemy. It was Napoleon. One thing that's really funny, I noticed the other day, I was watching with my wife, European Vacation. Chevy Chase goes to the top of the Empire State Building, Eiffel Tower, goes to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and he sings the overture to 1812, just really briefly. It's like, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of weird because the Eiffel Tower is sort of a symbol of Napoleon back in the day, and he's singing the victory against Napoleon in that movie. It's just like, there you go. This is that ancient schism that's playing out in Europe to this day. They're still fighting over these same things, and the Westerners have the upper hand. We all know that Russia doesn't have any kind of mass distribution of TV or anything like that, or Hollywood. It's all in the West, and the West has a very Russia-phobic perspective of these. So I'm off topic there, but
well, RT, like they do, and they made a bunch of movies, like the Russian movies over the Soviet period were, all over the world, and like Yugoslavia and stuff. Like there's another side of the brain that is like the humans, the neurons, the billions of us. Like there's like a West hemisphere of the brain.
Yep.
There's definitely an East one.
I just want to show this video real fast. And
God.
Can I share audio? Can I do that? I don't know if I can. Oh, there we go.
I think it does it automatically. Yeah.
Does anyone recognize this?
I was just talking to a friend about, like, I was like, man, like the Simpsons, they had so many things, predictions.
That's
and
that Yale show, right? That Yale show, The Simpletons, like, right? The show about all of us, made by the Yale graduates.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah. Well, it has tons of PP in it all over the place. So everyone kind of realizes that now. But what are they telling us with all of that? Well, obviously they don't want us to believe in the things we're seeing, right? But I'm actually wondering why these guys chose to show this in a Hollywood episode.
It's true. We are aliens. But what are you going to do about it? It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a two-party system.
Well, I believe I'll vote for a third-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away.
All hail why we have to build a ray gun to aim at a planet I never even heard of.
Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos.
Go!
The end. Hilarious, right? Funny
Fucking
show.
perfect.
Now, why did they show a freaking space cannon? Why they have the story of people, slaves, building a cannon, shooting at another planet that they've never heard of? I mean, if this is not giving us the clue.
Scientology.
Well, I mean, did this ever happen? And
This
if
is
it-
Scientology. This is
Oh, yeah.
This is the theme from the movie Final Fantasy in 1999. The Thetans and like the traps regression.
You're
I'm
right.
sorry.
that-
Yeah, are we? Is that pretty much the end of the thing, the presentation? I don't want to interrupt. Sorry.
Oh, that was just the end of that video. Yeah, that's over. I was just talking about now.
Okay.
But yeah,
I have a couple thoughts I wanted to bring up. Just
Yeah,
like some things I've been thinking about. So like, okay. First off, World War Zero, Napoleon, flamenco. You've been looking at that. Do you know about Mikhail Bulgakov, who wrote his book Master and Margarita and was thrown into a gulag for writing it? And so afterwards, he had to write it again on toilet paper and smuggle it out. And so for the most part, a lot of people in the Soviet Union started putting out things exactly the way they had to. And Fomenko, being a guy who's studying forensics and passwords and encryption and decryption, is creating a system where he can say to the Soviet overlords, is this about a Russo state empire, which is good for their history? And then he can say yes. But when you read it and you start getting into it, you see what he's really saying is that very recently, like you're saying, that a bunch of nations had their history stolen from themselves. And this is a particularly big deal to Jews, actually. Because in the Soviet Union, you had Zionist Israel, which is for the longest time, was separated and kind of, he was trying to control rather than send them home, which is an interesting thing on the side. But Israel itself, I mean, a big part of this history, you've got this idea, there's Isis, there's Ra, Elohim, as we're talking, which is kind of like Buddha and Pest, right? Cities that are sold, that they've come together. So according to Fomenko, you've got cities that were moved around because of these disasters. And what happens is a nation will pick up and move. And a good example of this are the Jews, because literally, who better can you point to who's like taken their traditions with them to other places? So,
Gypsies.
You've heard this idea that Moscow is a star fort, but it's also Jerusalem. Have you heard it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So a lot of these stories have this idea that the nation itself has moved the state around. So sometimes these maps, actually, the names have been moved around because they're literally pins on this board game. And the other thing is saying that it's an empire. So we say it's an empire, but the reason is because, like you said, there was like no war. Like there wasn't necessarily war, but that in general, trade was more the emphasis of this period. So what's interesting is it's not just one ethnicity, which would have been, you look at the examples of single ethnicities like the Japanese of Edo period. It's a very interesting time, but they don't progress the way Iran did. When they became a Persian empire with tons of different kinds of people. Rome's a great example. Like someday they're going to look at the White House and say, look at that American architecture, the way you were saying about Roman architecture. Because the Romans didn't really invent architecture. They didn't even deal with numbers, really. They had like tally systems, but they did take people's kids. And through a system of human trafficking, they were able to create a state, right? And a nation, more importantly. So we think of Rome, did it exist? Well, at this point, people were like, Marco Polo, but he was Croatian, right? So like as you look at the whole expanse of what it was, you have people that were kind of allowed to be themselves, but they're a part of like this area, like this nobleman thing that's existing, like the Tartarians. And that's not to say that that's all the people, or even that they were ever referred to necessarily as that. So, I mean, by other people, but they probably didn't refer to themselves necessarily as Tartarians. And it's kind of like the Phoenicians. Right? Phoenicians didn't refer to themselves as Phoenicians. We call them that now. So it's a thing there. But in terms of also de-evolution, okay, so let me go back also because I had to take a couple notes. It's like good stuff. I didn't want to stop it. Regression. Okay, so when we're talking about how every generation thinks that they're learning and evolving, they're not, right? And you can see this through smartphones. They're actually getting less. I can't remember your number. These kind of situations wouldn't have happened to our parents are now commonplace. And you can see what it did to our parents because they went from having a smartphone in their lifetime, and it just destroyed them, as far as I can tell. So think of that in terms of Havelock, and these stories of God, And so these ideas that God is this, metaphor, I think are newer than, if you look back, it's like gods are like people that just do more stuff. And then eventually, like, that's just hard to believe that people could be doing those kinds of things. So a lot of the stories kind of, fell apart. And then in terms of Judaism, which is like one of the most fascinating trifectas of religion and history and culture, because it's able to exist in spite of all the things that have happened to it, right? And you've got people in Africa that are still practicing mitzvahs in Ethiopia that are completely different from.
Well, that's stolen history, isn't it? I mean, whose history is all of that?
Right.
Passover stuff, that Passover, that memory. Who's that belong
to? So around the time of Spinoza, and I've been trying for this whole episode, and I can't get it. It was like the guy who was this rabbi who said that like aliens, like that it was all about aliens in the 1600s. And it's actually a pretty, it's, you think about the, what's the stone, the Arabs spin around, it's a meteor inside of a cube, right? And you start thinking about the idea of asteroids and this thing between, are they coming from above or are they coming from below? Or is it lightning that's coming down? Is it, volcanoes that are rising up? And it's a bit of both, because there's like a marriage between that is sustainable green energy. And so you look at Tartaria as a place that had all of this tech, right? You have these people that are really trying to figure out Tartaria, but they also really want to believe in, like, wow, someday Tesla could exist. And they're like, wait, it could have existed before, which allows them to use their imagination to kind of imagine things. And so some of the times we're dealing with modern presuppositions, it's like Godzilla or something. It's like Godzilla is a bigger reptile in the replacement of an actual extremophile titan. It's beyond our comprehension, right? It's that burning bush kind of concept. So
that's what got me into predictive programming, because that's where you go ahead, you guys say.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, and there's so much there. Programming, you think about language. Actually, like one of my favorite examples in the Philippines, they stopped a war from happening because all they had to do was figure out they were afraid of vampires, take a guy into the woods, kill him, drain him of his blood, leave some holes in his neck, and it saved millions of lives probably, right? So psychological operations by the military, especially ones that involve Tartary, that's a
right. So one question to ask is, how prevalent are these, psyops, like Mockingbird, so forth?
Completely.
It's
way more prevalent than actual wars.
Like, it's actually hard to convince people. Like, I have a lot of media friends that they don't actually let media in unless it follows certain guidelines. You're not allowed to be revolutionary in media, period. Video games.
I mean, I've known a lot of people who went to school to do psychological operations. It's a good job. Like, if you can do that for the military, then you can actually get on Twitter, pretend.
I think you have to be naturally good at it.
Start asking QAnon people if they're, or QAnon people if they're, and you can figure out which ones are just going to march and which ones are crazies.
Right. So to that point,
a lot of people that think war is all theater, that people don't actually go to war as much as you think, and that not as many die as you think. And
wait. War is all theater. Doesn't mean it's not war. See, that's like saying wrestling is not real, man. Like, so the sophism of it's real. And so these kids in the 17th century with their little action figures like Dungeons and Dragons that have set up, that's how they move the map around. So war is theater for a lot of reasons, right? So all around us, we're in this war, but we're playing by these specific rules. So let me
speak to that one, actually. Because we have these video games, right? Age of Empires and stuff. We got Chinese warlord games where you're literally slaughtering millions of people all by yourself. And that is clearly depicting a warlike history of the human race. We're setting it in stone. Right. This is who we are. This is how we are.
Imprinting this idea that came first. And in fact, in school, they push this idea. So in anthropology, they told us it started with war. But it's
actually a revolutionary idea to suggest that we haven't even had as many wars as we're talking about. That stuff like the Trojan War and the Crusades and all of that have just been one memory that have been spread out as much as they can to make us feel like that is how we are. That actually never happened.
Well, and then naturally you have to think about what circumstances result in chaos, right? So natural disasters or environmental disasters. You look at Katrina, and you got crazy things happen during Katrina, right? So a big thing when you look at what happened to this environmental disaster, well, hey, does mud flood check that? And it totally makes sense.
Okay, so let me speak to that real fast. So your point earlier, if that predictive programming can be overwhelming, they'll give us all kinds of lines of direction we can go in, and we get completely lost with the explanations of possibilities, which is why I was saying earlier to come to grips with something stable that I can actually, and looking at our history, we have to look at it. We have to say resolve the conflicts and the questions that haven't been answered. And when we do that, we can start to answer all of the questions easily. There's stuff that's just been popping out at me lately that's just so obvious. Like, for example, I always wondered why Christopher Columbus thought he was discovering a new world. Sure, he didn't get it here. And why Amerigo Vespucci thought he discovered a new world. If there was already people there, I'm not talking about Native Americans, I'm talking about a whole empire. If that whole empire was there here in America, and the White House was there as a church long before as a White House, then why would they ever say that it wasn't there? And the only way to explain that is because they have a schism in Europe. Again, go back to that schism, which explains it. And turns out, and I'm just going to briefly go with the history. The Russo Empire after the Crusades had grown prominent. They had a world empire. They basically they took over Istanbul by force, and they imposed usury on them. They didn't really want to do that because they were attacking their enemies who had done that to them in the first place. So they tried to do it the best way they could. They really gave everyone the rights back and everything. And it was okay for a while until people started burning witches and hanging people in their villages in Western Europe. This phenomenon is real, and it happened for a long time. What happened is a village will pick out somebody and say, this person is talking to the devil, and it told him to betray us all, to kill or destroy our village or cause our village to be destroyed by some means. And people are just like, it can't be serious. And there's like, we're serious, and it's happened to other villages. Then you find these other stories like in Arabian Nights, the gypsies, they are offering people riches, rewards to become king if you betray your people. Over and over, we see this mysterious force offering people to, power and wealth if they betray their own. So eventually you get this inquisition from the Russo Empire spreading out over Europe, Western Europe, and they are basically telling people to stop burning each other and saying, we don't have to do it that way. Let's impose some law here and try to inquire what they believe and get them to stop being anti their village. I believe that these heretics were really receiving voices from somebody, telepathy. It wasn't necessarily the devil, but it was somebody. And yeah, they were nefarious means. They're trying to get them to betray the people. It wasn't cool. So after a while, the Inquisition failed. It just became extremely unpopular and ineffective. And those heretics believed that they represented the invisible God from ancient Egypt, that they brought the Ark of Covenant to Europe, and it's maintained all of that lineage today. And I can't come to not believe this because I was raised in it. And I know my parents, believe that they have this blood connection to this past. They're not going to let go of it. So I had to take it very seriously and look at it. And it looks like the Western Europeans, they decided to flee to America at the time when Columbus left on a bunch of flotillas. And this got into the Bible, the book of Noah. And he's leading the Israelites to Israel, which is in America. And he doesn't get there himself, but he creates a bunch of arks, and the arks save the people. This happened only 500 years ago. It's not an ancient story, and it's the Westerners remembering their voyage from the Reformation, or there's a Reformation memory, remembering the Inquisition and fleeing the Inquisition to the New World. So these precursors, prototype Jews and Catholics are coming to America, and they hate the Russo Empire, which is already in America. So you can see now the pretense, finally, why an explanation why these guys actually believe that America was a new world, because they denied the Russo Empire. It didn't exist to them. Here's another point that's really cool one to me. This is about St. Petersburg. We've always heard about St. Petersburg and the gates of St. Peter's being the gates of heaven, which you have to go through in order to get to heaven. Well, it turns out that Petersburg is a real place. It has a specific shape of a circle and a pillar. So the cosmic mountain appears all over Saturnian cosmology everywhere. St. Petersburg is designed in this shape. And they have these huge gates there. Those gates between West and East. And when Christ was crucified in Istanbul, he basically passed through, not those gates, but similar ones, into the Eastern Russo Empire, went back home. He didn't die on the cross. He went back home and continued his life. He was crippled though. He was a giant, by the way. I'll get to that another time. But the people in the West, they didn't remember a giant going home, which is what the Eastern Chronicles say happens. They remember Jesus rising to heaven. That's what they say in the Bible. So you have to say, what are they talking about? Which heaven? Up there, or the heaven of the Russo Empire, maybe, which was heavenly to the Westerners. They had no usury, had no circumcision, you had no belief in the resurrected deity, savior. You had none of that crap. You had overpopulation and disease, you name it. We all know about England in those centuries. But the further east you go, you have paradise. You have palaces and fountains and just technology and freedom, and it's just, you name it. Bruce Horde Empire. I'm a big fan of it. And it's because of this memory that they believe that this location was heaven. They wrote down their books. He went to heaven. Later on, a lot of people in Europe tried to get to the Bruce Horde Empire through immigration policy. And they had very strict, and they let anyone in. And so the St. Petersburg gates became the gates of heaven for like 300 years. People would go there. That's as far as they would get. Certain ones would be let through and other ones not. And they were judged for their sins. It's all there. It's all real. It's happened. It's not heaven. It's not, related to any deities. It's just part of history and perspective of the people in the Reformation. And of
That's
course,
a really interesting view on that, dude.
Thank you.
Did you still have some more slides? Because I didn't feel like you were done with your presentation yet. I'd love to see what else you got.
Yeah, sure. We got time, right?
Also, do you think the Rus Horde Empire could also potentially be Tartarians in that?
I think it's the same place,
sense?
the same memory.
Word.
Tartaria is the Western's name for it, right? Rus Horde was an earlier name used by the Russians themselves, but it's kind of it's almost like a mean thing to say horde. Like, why are you calling them the horde? So let me spell that real fast. It's because, and Andreas actually mentioned this earlier. The Rus Horde Empire was very eclectic, not one kind of race or genealogy at all over the place. You got all kinds of humans with bear heads, dog heads, hairy bodies, very common. You got giants and you got small people. There was nothing, they were, in the West, you find a lot more conformity, but in the East, the opposite of conformity. So trying to remember what my point was there. But the Rus Horde Empire was called the Horde because of that reason. It wasn't insulting to them. They liked it. They were fine being eclectic, and they wanted everyone that they conquered to keep their traditions. They're actually pretty cool about it. An example of media predictive programming that we all know about. If you guys played Warcraft 2, Warcraft 1, or any of them, actually, you got this horde. We're all fighting the horde, right? Who are we? We're the paladins of, from the crusade. And it's a stolen memory of the crusades, which of course we all know the people in the West believe that they were the ones who did it, from Italy, not from the Rus Horde Empire. And therefore in Warcraft, they say, we're fighting the horde. We're fighting the Rus Horde Empire. It's right there. The heathens, the unchristianized ones, the ones that look like different kinds of people, like orcs and stuff, because they don't look like us, hairless bodies.
So so Rus means red, and so a big part of it is like the tar. They talk about the Redlands, they talk about the red beards, they talk about Genghis Khan and Muhammad having red hair, right? But Itaruska is like where the Romans have the sacking of Tarpeia, the raping of the Sabines. They have a holiday in Italy every year where they celebrate stealing the land from the Tartarians, and they raped the women and they drugged and killed the men, and then that's the holiday. But her name was Tarpeia. But she was what we call today Etrusca, Etruscan, Etrusca. So this is the Etruscan Empire, and that's so Rus is found also in Thracian, right? When you think Taracia, you see like Tarusian. They have like that a lot. Like it's actually the ending in a lot of the sounds.
Very cool.
That's pretty dope.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking at what topic we should go next. How about you just go back in time a little bit? So talk about empires. I really believe.
Hold on, real quick though. I forgot a second. So another thing was we were talking about like Jewish history. So
yeah.
Esau, when you're talking about the Arabs. So I was talking about this idea of them worshiping a meteor. There's a big concept here with the son of the firstborn versus the son of the mother, which is the maternal lineage. And so Esau also takes the blessing of the older brother, Jacob takes the blessing from Esau. So you have this other version of events, which some people believe, which is it's not Isaac and Ishmael that are the descendants of the Arab and the Jewish people, but it's actually the tribes from taking the blessing. So that the original son from Abraham to Isaac would have been Esau, right? It's the Esau. And so today, if the Arab people came from Esau.
So let's talk about that real fast. The Bible actually talks about these people as humans, right? That they start a lineage of humans on Earth. If you look at Velikovsky and authors like that, you'll see that there's arguments that these were these figures in the Bible were representations of events that happened. They're larger than life. They were way bigger than actual humans, and they're not human at all. Let's just jump into it. It's a video from David Talbot. Actually, he's another researcher who is the first one I saw, and he basically described the Saturnian cosmology. It's the first place I heard about it. This is the hypothesis origin story of Earth, that Earth started out as a moon of Saturn in a collinear configuration of planets, essentially, and experienced a great deal of cataclysm in a very short time until we finally arrived in modern times, in a period which perhaps started about 1,000 years ago. So essentially, in this version, in Saturnian cosmology, Earth's timeline is very short, and it happens rapidly. The collinear configuration of planets, I've described in my video and other places, is based on electric universe theory of all the planets being stuck together in a straight line because of a massive electromagnetic flow of energy through them from the sun. These deities made all kinds of shapes and symbols in the sky, and they're remembered and written down as symbols and so forth, but also as deities, with names. This is would be very natural, because if they were watching these things in the sky move around and cause cataclysm, the default thought of any intelligent being would be that they are intelligent too, the deities in the sky. So we give them names, we give them personalities. We say this one Kronos just ate all of her children for some reason. We don't know why she did that. Oh wow, Zeus, the biggest child was too fat and intervened, and now all the children are coming out of her mouth. What a weird story that is. Let's write it down, make Norse mythology. And nobody today knows what the hell they're talking about. It doesn't make any sense.
You notice though, right? And like most of the old pictures, you see the three, you see Saturn and the moon and the sun sort of at this point where there's a conjunction. And that's pretty much most of the beliefs up until in the Mayan astrology as well. Saturn was essentially the same size as the moon in the sky.
Gotcha. In this depiction, you got Saturn in the background, the big one. In front of that is Venus, and then Mars, the red dot, oscillating between Earth and Venus. Venus is a gas giant, a gas dwarf, whatever you call it. It's a gas planet. It's not a solid rock. For example, that show, Third Rock from the Sun. Sorry, no, Earth is the second rock from the sun. And Venus took many different shapes over time. Today, they say Venus has hard ground because of the probes that went there. How easy of a lie is that to make? Venus has no mountains, no ground. It's entirely a plasma form. It's extremely hot. It's about 800 degrees at its atmosphere, and it's more or less in plasma state at all times. I jump back to Velikovsky, because he described all of this in detail, these theories, but he also called out a lot of modern physics. He said, you guys aren't making the right predictions. They predicted Venus to be cold, 200 degrees or less, which is cold. And he said it's going to be 600 or 800, and he was right. So if this guy, this researcher, is predicting things that NASA can't get right in the 60s, precursor to Carl Sagan, then he basically is onto something. So the idea here is that Venus.
What is this video again? Where did you get this video from?
This is David Talbot's documentary, 1996, Remembering the End of the World. You can find it on YouTube. Very amazing. Watched it many times. So Velikovsky, for example, he said, Venus, we know what it is. It's this hot dragon in mythology. It keeps changing shape. So it has to still be hot today. It couldn't have cooled down in a short time. He was right. But before Velikovsky, a very interesting claim was made by Sigmund Freud. A lot of people don't know this. Right before he died, mysteriously, he made the claim that in his mind, the Israelites of the ancient Egyptian empire, the Israelites that made it today, that survived till today, were the upper class, not the lower class. They weren't the slaves, they were the masters. And it's only for that reason that they remember their story, their version, their perspective, which puts them in the victim perspective. They couldn't have been, they're covering up the crimes. That's why I said at the beginning, covering up the crimes of the past, make it look like someone else did it to you. So let me get into Egypt real fast, because it's fascinating to me. In a couple of ancient Egyptian depictions, you see black slaves. And then mostly you see white slaves everywhere. And it's like, wow, what an eclectic time for slavery. We had them actually working together. Nope. As it turns out, the big mystery of whether or not the slaves were black or white is tied right into Napoleon's journey to Egypt. He got there, everything changed. He wanted the Jesuits were going to construct the Nile, and he said no. He didn't want to destroy their culture. He didn't want to flood the Delta, which is what happened, and it sort of ruined that region. So why is that? So here's why. The Jesuit plan was to convert every indigenous race on the world over to monotheism, the savior story. And they went to Egypt. And it's my belief that the Jesuits created the Sphinx in about the 16th or 17th century. Fomenko says earlier than that. Historians say way earlier than that. Fine, whatever. I do believe that the pyramid is very old, but the Sphinx was designed in the 17th century specifically. Here's how I know. It is the recreation of the old god Osiris. We got you see here in this video, you got the beard of Mars down on the ground. You got the nose or red apple of the eye, and then you got the crowning Venus above it. So this is Osiris, made up of 3 parts: Isis, Horus, and sorry, no, it's 2 parts. I'm forgetting my mythology here. Anyway, the story of Osiris is that he was broken into 3 pieces and hid all over the earth. So this is 3 pieces are Saturn, Mars, and Venus. They did in fact come apart. In fact, you'll see right here in this video, this is what the depiction looked like when they came apart, and Jupiter is seen for the first time in the collinear configuration. They're all spreading out into a round table configuration. So anyway, Osiris is the old Egyptian god, old Persian god, old pyramidal empire god. I call it the pyramidal empire because the pyramids of those empires spread all over the world back then, in the equator zones. So Osiris, somebody decided to rebuild Osiris in modern times in the 17th century, to put the nose back and everything as it was. That could only mean one thing, that Osiris is back to claim that location, Egypt, and all of the slaves of that region. Napoleon made peace with those Egyptians and turned them against the deep state as one of his allies. He set up a project there of a giant of the Suez Canal. It was the precursor to the Suez Canal. He was going to connect those 2 oceans, connect Asia to Europe. And he was going to put this statue right there in front of the riverbank, welcoming the ships, the Statue of Liberty. So of course was a project that a lot of people associate with a French designer, but it was Napoleon who decided to create the Statue of Liberty. A lot of people think the Statue of Liberty is a French woman in robes. It is an Egyptian woman in robes. This is how stolen the Egyptian history is. They took it all. They put it somewhere else. So so that statue of Osiris, that Sphinx, when Napoleon showed up, his army destroyed it. They didn't tear the whole statue down because soldiers, superstitious as they were, they don't do those things. They don't destroy God statues. But they did correct the statue. Mars is gone and Venus is gone. So Mars is gone and Venus is gone. So they cut off the nose and they cut off the beard of the Sphinx to make the slaves, the remnants of the old Egyptian empire, made it clear that the Jesuits were not representing any god, and that they were indeed free. This is what I meant earlier when I said Napoleon was freeing people. And that, watch, we're going to knock this god's nose off. And if he's going to strike us back, then we were wrong, which makes this whole thing very ironic once you consider that the mud flood event might have actually really looked like God showing up and just punishing everyone who sided with Napoleon.
So do you think the mud flood thing was like a diluvian thing where it wasn't really a water flood? It was more of like what you're saying, a mud flood?
Right, let me get to the details of it.
Thing?
So you got an energy weapon hitting Earth in certain locations. Destroying those locations, the materials getting hot and going up into the atmosphere. And it's falling down in what's called mud rains. Got a picture here. No, I went away. It's over here. One second. This is a cool picture. Painting. All right, so look at this painting. What the heck is going on here? You got something called blood rain, which is a term for reddish mud rain. Just looks like blood. You have these weird stars shooting out at the cities from the sky. You have what looks like giants compared to the size of horses, feeling sick and falling over and dying. These are strange events and paintings from the 19th century. And so the mud flood event, which eventually was mud rain falling from the sky and raising the level of the ground. This is devastating. This ruins all crops and prevents life from happening. I found this excerpt from a newspaper microscopical analysis of the dust of regular winds of the blood rain. This is a real study of blood rain back in the 19th century. And they said this is fascinating. If you look at some of these, if you look at the rest of the article, they say that this really needs to be studied, great and rapidly increasing interest. They want to know what this blood rain was and what caused it. So to get back on topic, the mud flood event, which if it was caused by a weapon, it took that material out of the ground, heated up, put it in the atmosphere, came back as mud rain. But nobody shooting this weapon would want the mud to rise so high that it couldn't be covered up in the future or be left behind as evidence and to be determined. So the Grand Canyon scar, for example, if that was caused by this weapon, was a huge mistake because it left behind Grand Canyon. And now we can say, oh, that's evidence of something, not water. So that wasn't intentional. A lot of this wasn't intentional. And we got to ask, what else could have happened that caused an unintentional disaster to make it so much worse than they wanted it to be? And that would be this coronal storm system. This is described again by Andrew Hall of the Electric Universe. This is a snapshot of his video showing the similarities between a coronal loop on the sun and what he believed was a secondary discharge of electricity that occurred on Earth that carved the Midwest regions. He went to those regions in Utah and so forth and said, these are electric scars. He's a scientist. He made the theories. He's a serious guy, so I don't have to do the work. And I'm really glad I found him because the only difference between what he's saying and what I'm saying is that he believes this happened in the past naturally. And I believe this happened 200 years ago. Secondary discharge. He describes it as something that is a side effect of a primary discharge. Back then you have Mars, Prometheus, attacking Earth in recent cataclysms, electric discharge, hitting Earth, hitting Mars. On Mars, you see tremendous negative scarring, huge canyons, way bigger than Grand Canyon, all over the place. Prometheus, which was the myth of Mars, people watched as Prometheus's liver was eaten every day and then grew back. This was a punishment for Prometheus giving technology to humans. So what technology? Well, Mars showed up 9 times apparently and struck the Earth with tremendous electric force. Humans were forced to survive, learn about electricity, learn about cathedrals, all that kind of stuff. So for the Prometheus event, you have electric scarring on Mars, but you don't have any on Earth. You don't see electric scarring throughout the planet. So he was wondering, why is these locations so unique? Western America, South North America, why are they so unique? And he said, his theory, secondary electric discharge must have occurred after the primary discharge heated the Earth enough. After all that electricity got into the Earth, it had to go somewhere. Heat cannot be created or destroyed. It's the law of thermodynamics. That heat eventually looped back. Secondary loop is what he calls it. And it came out of the ground. It literally forced itself out of the ground and created canyons on Earth. The Chinese dragon, for example, is a memory of this event, where the dragon is remembered as being close to the ground, gripping the ground and causing mayhem and carnage, not something in the sky. So anyway, secondary discharge theory, to Andrew Hall, is something that happened naturally. To me, it's an explanation for why we see so much of this mud flood. It's because this is not intentional. They destroyed everyone they had to do, all those kingdoms, they got them all. But by doing that, they created so much excess heat to invent a secondary discharge that could not be controlled. This arced across the planet and just ruined locations here in America, but also in the Middle East. If you look at those maps, you'll see it's just scarred. You got islands all over the world, which look different. In South China, you got these islands which are empty. There's like a big hole in the ground. They're hard to explain. One of the atolls, what they're called, is explained by a Trinity bomb. Like we set off a nuclear bomb, hypothetical nuclear bomb there. It caused these certain islands. I would say, yeah, it caused all of them to do that, to shave off the top and carve a hole in the center. No, something else happened to those islands in just that region. There's a lot of examples of this. So the point is, secondary discharge was not intentional, and it was, they had no choice. That's what I'm saying. It could not have been oversight. They had no choice but to defeat all of their enemies at once, and therefore it caused this. And then they spent the rest of the last 200 years sort of doing everything they can to prevent us from ever finding the mud flood. It's literally like the last theory, it's the final one. That's why I keep hearing everyone say. Well, that was a lot of stuff.
Damn, dude. Holy shit.
Yeah.
That was a lot. My brain actually hurts. Like I can
That's
feel
excellent.
it.
I'm pretty happy with that. There's some good things you're pointing out. I would say that like mud flood is not something that is rare or doesn't happen. I mean, it's right now, as I was saying earlier, with like Peru, is, you know, we have huaicos, which are mud floods that happen pretty much every season. And around the world in Russia and Mongolia, they also have mud floods. And there's also like mud volcanoes. Like volcanoes are essentially just pushing out dirt and sediments being pushed across more than it's like super heated. What you have is you have plasmic steam in these vents underground, and then the steam is so hot and so pressurized it becomes plasmic, and then it goes in every direction, creating these lightning storms, which are creating these patterns, which are the patterns you're referring to that are being made. And then so you're wondering how much power can you produce? Well, look at a volcano that has uranium deposits in it, or other sorts of materials that create like not just chemical reactions, but essentially like what we refer to as nuclear explosions. Now, nuclear explosions aren't exactly the same as how we've been described. You've probably seen that, but very large pressures underground can produce these extreme underground lightning. Yeah, and then the boring tubes, right? So like Howard Hughes, his family fortune for making airplanes and movies all came from the 1890s. His family, before he was an orphan, you know, they had a fortune from making all of the drill bits for, you know, these giant drill systems. And there's subterranes. I see you've got stuff on like the foundlings there too. All the trains that were bringing foundlings everywhere because so many people were sterilized by this process that the kids ended up, you know, being taken from their parents and raised with new code.
Let's cover that one real fast, just to slip it in there because this is amazing to me. But it's the whole cargo cult theory. You know, what are cargo cults? You know, well, it's these cults that are entirely dependent on cargo, right? Simple as that. And during this mud flood event, afterwards, places that were hit by it were uninhabitable. They were dependent entirely on cargo. Some of the cargo came from.
I love that you've got Gurchi for this too. It's perfect. Whirling dervishes.
Right. Yeah. Some of this cargo came from the sky. Some of it came from trains. And here is a map of, you know, America being repopulated, of course, with train tracks. But what's these other regions? You basically have these weird traditions of people worshiping something that they're looking up in the sky at. And in an earlier one, let's go back to it.
If you check out Gurdjieff, who did the Enneagram, the 9-pointed star, I was almost going to use that as my background earlier. It's, you know, these dances are technically, according to Gurdjieff, medicinal, and they have to do with like the fourth way school. Like Esalen is pretty big into that kind of stuff.
So what I'm saying is that they could have been a special time when people saw the weirdest things show up, things that sort of look like what they're saying right there, circular, energetic, anti-gravity devices dropping cargo on them in the 19th century. If that's not the explanation, something else, that's fine. But what was really weird here, and this guy in this one video, Phillip Druzhinin, I believe it's his video, really makes the case that, you know, this could not have come from anything else. They're looking up in the sky and they're rotating. What is rotating in the sky that made them do this as a religion? So that is what a cargo cult is.
Well, yeah, yeah, Philip's a good friend. That's exactly what we were talking about earlier with the rock, right? So like the Arabs and the Jews having this rock that they, you know, are fighting over the land, you know, it has a temple on a mound that has to do with this trifecta zone of these three different, as you said, parts that connect to Isis Ra Elohim, as we're now referring to Thundercats, since it's no longer Egyptian, or whatever Egyptus means, because, you know, Kemet was not Greek when we called it that. So Ptah would have had a better name for it. But, you know, we now live in a society where all of Egyptian magic, or if you want to call it that again, it's like, I think it's better just to call it Kemetic, you know, because alchemy means the study of Kemet. So all of it's just this, and there's also algebra, which is a study of Hebrew, right? So all of these old schools are like Hermetic schools or Kemetic schools. That's why all of this is coming back around. It's interesting you're talking about predictive programming, because clearly there's a group that are aware of this stuff. I mean, if L. Ron Hubbard, Aleister Crowley, Manly P. Hall, they're all writing books about these ideas in the 1800s, 1900s, you know, and it seems pretty clear that they're setting up for us to come to this realization together. The question is, are they trying to help us learn from this or regress from this? And if you look at the foundlings, like you're talking these cargo cults, but beyond just the cargo,
they're trying to divide and conquer us. They're trying to confuse us. They're trying to assess on the wrong
like every 200 years, you like build up new nations because they're like corn stalks, you know, and that way, like, you don't have to worry about monocrops having famines. It seems like that's part of the plan.
Yeah,
I mean,
go
what's the end result, though? I mean, I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, if they're so all powerful, is money so important? I would feel like it's
It's
not.
power
What are
is
they trying to gain? But
what's the
after the power, is that what do we have that they want so bad?
Oh, let me get to the present. Actually,
hold on, wait. I just want to say, paradiser is Persian for gardener and emperor, and the reason that they have you is because they want what's most from you and your potential. And if you become a scientist, an inventor, and a doctor, that's very valuable.
Yeah, but they don't let us do any of those things. So let me get right to the question there. What do they really want from us right now? And it seems like a lot of events are happening right now. People are losing faith in the institutions. They're actually asking this question a lot. What is the game plan? It seems like they're all the deep state or whatever you want to call it is literally about to lose all that power. They're going out in several revolutions happening around the world right now. So what were they? Why did they want to go out so hard? Why are they driving this all into the ground? And the answer to that question, unfortunately, if you're really looking on terms of all of this, is that this is all about the future. The answer to the question, it's all about the future. Money and all that stuff doesn't matter if it doesn't add up in the future. And the most important thing in the world is children. If we don't have the ability to have children in the future, we don't have a future. They're gonna overwhelm us later with the numbers. So they are literally going after our ability to have children right now. A mass vaccination, sterilization campaign, you name it. It's been there our whole lives, but right now it's hitting climax. And when it's over, those who basically still have the ability to have children will be the ones that have to fight the next battle in the future.
So full on Handmaid's Tale shit here.
So the World Economic Forum predicts by 2045, and I use the word predict slightly, the 0 sperm count and the 0 egg count, right? And so the intention is obviously to hit a point where, I guess obviously is a fucked word to use, excuse me. Sorry. But if they're going to remove the ability for everyone to have families for one generation. And then it's who will produce children are, as they're doing correctly, in vitro fertilization of cloning since 1997, they will probably just be in vitro clones brought back in 20 years, maybe 2060s, 2071. And there's a number of people that are talking about 2071, 2074, as being like the beginning. I think Cyberpunk has they make references to these little predictive programming things. But regardless, if the World Economic Forum is to be trusted, the sperm count and egg count will hit a point where children are no longer conceived at all, then it will take in vitro frozen eggs or some sort of cloning technology. So that will be the beginning of the next cycle. And whomever raises those kids, the first generation will probably be like, as in history has been done before, the state, right? So you have these orphanages and they're taught a way to think, probably a new language created by Google, or some kind of AI designed mimetic language that replaces, Newspeak. That would be the first step.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys have completely blown our brains here. So we gotta cut out. We gotta end this and bring it back again later. But Mark popped back in. He's gone for a bit. Mark,
I want
you got
some sort of conclusion though from you guys.
Mark, what's your
least.
positive hippie conclusion to this? We love you. You gotta unmute yourself though.
He's still mute. Wait.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. Can you hear me now?
There you are. Yeah,
right.
we can.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Bravo to both you guys. I'm glad you had the idea to bring both Andreas and Ari together, because I definitely have been inspired by both of their work. And combined, here we are. I'm baffled as usual, but I was kind of thumbing through. I don't know if you guys noticed before this book, wondering if there was a connection. It's Ignatius Donnelly's The Destruction of Atlantis. So, I think we should continue this another time, but do you guys, Ari or Andreas, do you guys recognize that book? Has that come across your desk?
Totally, yeah. My main theory at this point is Atlantis as a city-state is a great example that Herodotus had, and the destruction of Atlantis being an accident. I think it's between the both, because it's more Machiavellian that there's nepotism that led to whatever cataclysmic disaster. I believe was volcanoes that were being used as power plants and the like for mining, that led to this chain reaction that actually is the beginning of this what we call reset. But like not to say that there weren't people that were living off automated things and so that they had already lost sight of it. I think society was actually at a more advanced point than that. So I'm not convinced it was just an all-out collapse because of the society falling apart.
In Saturnian cosmology, it's a result of the collinear configuration coming apart, entirely natural event, which caused Atlantis to sink into the North Pole.
Yeah, I don't go with the Terrence McKenna. I mean that's probably what any Chaldean sorcerer would have said. Like, oh yeah, no, check the stars, tracks. I'm sure, but the thing is, rich people like to be the ones to pay to make a prophecy happen all the time. I know plenty of people who do it. So it's not necessarily anything other than theatrics at that point. But I do believe, light is being sent here through data. I remember like 2010 when like the University of Mexico City kids were creating Li-Fi. So you could flicker, you could see data through the flickering of the LEDs. So one could presuppose if you take stars and you use them to, shoot a Dyson sphere of light, like a laser towards a sodium solution, it could then cause chain reactions, which would become geological, then biological, then life would form, let alone all sorts of other data that you could implant inside of in a system, or a hack that you could change. I mean, like the amount of interaction that could exist in that system is plausible, but it also it looks pretty obvious that DNA itself is written in this larger schema. So whatever it is, it's not enough to say that these polytheistic characters are just super us. There's also something more to that. I think that's what St. Augustine was talking about when he was trying to wrestle with pantheism to understand what is the difference between God, who is she, the darkness, right? And then, out of the matrices, this light being, Lucifer, and others like him that are data transferred upon us.
Very cool.
God damn. I'm seriously going to have weird dreams tonight. Like This is way crazier than I thought it was going to be, and we definitely have to do a part 2 because I know Ari's got more in his noggin. I can see it. I can see it from here.
Gotta get organized, but yeah.
No, this is really good, actually. Ari, we should talk more. I'll bring it to another round of. I'd like to bring some slides as well because this is good.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, we'll schedule another date like a month out. You guys can get yourself organized, and we can set a good date for everybody. Mark, you'll definitely be back, and we'll
plan
get,
a good 2-hour, 3-hour block.
Roman back in here too. But before we get out of here tonight, let's go around again. Ari, where can we find you?
ParadigmThreat.net. Just go to that site. You'll see my content, theories, and also link to Discord. Come check out our Discord. A lot of new people coming in these days, and so we're debating all of our stuff, figuring it all out. It's really fun. You're all welcome.
Nice.
And Andreas, where can we find you again?
Go check out tartarinova.com. You can find our YouTube links there. We have hundreds of videos that are hours long on pretty much every one of these subjects that we talked about tonight. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Awesome. And Mark.
Right on. Well, I just got a Rockfin channel up and going, so people can go check me out on Rockfin, and I'm going to be streaming live as well, so look forward to that. And My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. Search it in any podcast app, and check us out on Patreon and Instagram too. Buy me a coffee. There's a bunch of places you can find us.
Nice. Dude, everybody, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
We had a couple
amazing.
people had to cut out early, and I
Mind-blowing.
get it. It's getting late, especially where you guys are. But
Well, it was a 2-hour mind-blowing episode where people were like, hold on, my brain's exploding. I gotta go. I gotta recover.
And if you're listening on audio, seriously, go check out the video because that's where all the good shit is.
Yeah.
All of Ari's slides and shit. Like, gotta check it out. All right, guys, have a good night. We will set up a date and talk to you guys next time.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.